Are you looking for a way to edit your images without over manipulating them or making extra things in the photo? Well, today we're going to cut to the chase and look at just the tools that you need in order to get the edits that you want on your images quickly and simply. Let's go. So here we are inside of ON1 Photo RAW. I have an image of this alligator. Really easy to do. All right. The first step is going to be activating Brilliance AI. Now, this is obviously for those of you who are using a more recent version of ON1. But if you have an older version, all you're going to do is click on tone and color, and you can use the AI auto. That's going to help you out a lot. Or you can just come in and start modifying your exposure tools here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So that way, if you're using a older version, you don't have to worry about trying to figure this out. So we'll turn off Brilliance AI. And the first thing that I like to do is look at my histogram. I noticed that I'm missing some information over here on the right side. So I'm going to come down and grab my white slider, and I'm just going to move the information more over to the right. It doesn't have to get all the way to that edge. I just want to get it pretty close. Now, the next step, once I have my dynamic range relatively where I want it to be, I'm going to go ahead and play around with my shadow slider. For me, I know that I like contrasty images. So I'm probably going to pull my shadows back, and then I'll pull my midtones up. That's going to help me with that balance overall. Now, the next step in contrast is a little controversial, and everyone will have a different method of doing this. But if I pull the contrast slider to the right, it will start to increase the overall contrast in the image. And I'm not looking at the histogram for this. I'm looking at the photo because every image is going to need something different. And the histogram doesn't really give me the illustrative representation of what I'm looking for in the image. And this is all subjective, by the way. You may think this looks great. You may think this looks great. It's all dependent on what your professional or your personal opinion is or taste is. So I'm just going to pull the contrast slider to about there. And all I'm looking for is making things a little bit darker, a little bit more rich. Now, because I lost a lot of the overall exposure in the image, I want to boost my exposure, and that's where the exposure slider comes in. I typically always recommend boosting exposure last after you've worked with these. Then you don't have to do that. It's, again, just a workflow procedure, but I don't need to put a whole bunch of exposure on this particular image. Every photo is going to require something different. For this one, I think somewhere around 0.3 is probably appropriate. So here's what we came into ON1 with, and here is where we've gone so far. Now, because this is a raw image, and I know that this is a raw image, if I click info, you can see right here, it says raw. That's how I know that this is a raw image. I know that I need to add in some structure. So I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to throw in a little bit of structure. It doesn't have to be a whole lot. You don't have to go crazy with it, but a little bit of structure goes a long way when you are working with raw files because they're not that sharp and contrasted straight out of camera. They're a flat profile. All right. So those are my basic adjustments there. Now, you could have gone into the camera profile if you wanted to really change that. The only reason I didn't go into that for this video is because this is just to be the simplest way of getting a really nice overall exposure. So now that you have your tone set the way that you want, it's time to start working with the color. And inside of the develop module, I want you to think corrective color changes, not overall holistic color changes like your final look. Unless, of course, you just want to stop in the develop module, which is fine. If that's where you feel comfortable, then you can absolutely just correct the base image and call it good and move on to the next one. Very popular for people who are working with large amounts of images. But all I'm looking for here is to add in a little bit of vibrancy. This photo is a little bit stale, so I can probably push the vibrancy up quite a bit. And then I also think that this photo could benefit from a little bit of saturation. So I'm going to go ahead and push the saturation just a little bit. And if I hit the backslash key to get the before and the after, you can see with those tonal changes or the contrast changes that I've put into the image, as well as the color, I'm getting a pretty good result overall that reminds me of what it looked like on the day, or at least enhances what I was looking at on the day. So right here, you could stop. This is the before and this is the after. Now, the next thing that I would recommend that you look at is lens corrections. Now, I don't personally think that there's any issue with this image as far as lens corrections or if it needs it, but we'll go ahead and activate lens corrections. And you can see it kind of just fixed a little bit of the perspective. And this is, again, subjective. You don't always have to do it. I think that it was fine without it. So just turning it off and turning it on, I think that that's fine. And it found the lens information here, but it didn't actually apply the preset. If I click the auto option, I think that this is working just fine. Now, of course, if you want to go way more in detail, I'll make a dedicated video about lens corrections and what all this stuff does. But essentially, what you'll be able to do is come into the make of your lens. So I know that for this particular camera, I was using the RF 100 to 400. That's a Canon lens. So we'll click on Canon, we'll click on lens, and you can see there's a long list of EF lenses available. But if I scroll down here, I have a few of the RF lens available, and the RF 100 to 400, we can click there. It's going to say, would you like to automatically use the profile that ON1 has? I can hit OK or hit cancel. I'm going to go with OK because for me, I think that it's just fine. It works out for this overall image. So again, turning this off and turning it back on, it just fixes a little bit of that pin cushion distortion, which again, I'm not going to go into on this particular video, but if that's something you're interested in, leave a comment down below. Say, Chris, I would really like to know about lens corrections. So now that we have lens corrections under our belt, let's go ahead and move on to the next step, which is cropping. So we'll hit the letter C on our keyboard. That brings us to the cropping tool. And again, this is subjective. You may not even want to crop your image, but if you want to, this is probably where you would throw that into the workflow. So I'm just going to pull down from the top of the frame here, and I'm just going to readjust the alligator to somewhere around here in the frame. I just feel like, you know, obviously no one is going to say what's the subject of this picture. The alligator is clearly the subject. So I'm not overly concerned about trying to make him more prominent, but I will do it just for showcasing here inside of this video. We'll hit the blue check mark and boom. Now we have him a lot larger in the frame, which I think works out pretty well. Now, the next step is local adjustments. And local adjustments allows you to really fine tune the tonal adjustments and even some color adjustments in your image. And I recommend this for every single photographer. If you're coming from Lightroom, this is just the masking aspect. So develop would be your global adjustments that are inside of the, I believe it's the adjustment tab. Don't quote me on that. But then the local adjustments would be your masking adjustments. And you could do your basics here. So if I just go ahead and hit the letter M on my keyboard to bring up the masking bug after I applied my local adjustment, I can come up here and grab a vignette tool, which is just the radial adjustment. If I click right in the center, you can see exactly what I'm getting here on the screen. Not going to insult anyone's intelligence, but if you're not familiar with this, all that it is doing is making a circle on the screen or an oval. It's applying the negative exposure adjustment on the outside, and on the inside, it's not applying any of that. So what I could do is move this around and shape it onto the alligator where I think it makes the most sense for it to be. So maybe something like that. And now I'm reshaping the light, focusing in on the alligator. Now, of course, I think that that is way too harsh and probably does not need to be that aggressive. So maybe something like that looks pretty good. And now we have this light beam or focus of light right here on the center of attention, which is the alligator. And maybe I'll just put it right over the alligator's head. So that way it is a little bit more noticeable. The next thing that I could do is I can really start to brush in some of those areas where I really want to direct the viewer's attention, which would be the eyes of the alligator. So I'll hit add adjustment, and then using a brush tool, using a style called lighten, I'll click on there. It's going to give me a increase of exposure. And then I'll just go ahead and make my brush size a little bit smaller using the bracket keys. I'm going to paint right over the eyes. Now, this is a subtle adjustment. You're not really going to notice it off the, just by initially looking at the image. It's one of those things that you will identify, like as you turn it off and on, you can see the eyes are just a little bit brighter. But if it's too much, you have two ways of controlling the adjustment. You can pull down on the overall opacity, which is my favorite method of doing it. But you could also come to exposure and you could pull down on that. So I'll pull the opacity around 62, and I think that that looks good. And then I'll come down to structure and give this a little bit of structure. And we'll also contrast those eyes so they really stand out from the rest of the alligator's body here. So now that I have everything where I need it to be, this is the before, and this is after our develop adjustments, lens corrections, and the local adjustments. Now we can jump into effects. And effects is one of those things that you could do a number of things to an image inside of ON1. But if you're only worried about enhancing the photograph from a very conservative photographer perspective, then there's only a few tools that you really need to focus on over here in the effects filter. The first one is going to be the curves tool, or I'm sorry, let's just do this in order. First one will probably be the color enhancer. And what the color enhancer allows you to do is just modify the colors that exist in the image using the the color range, the color range channels, and then you can use the hue, saturation, and brightness to actually manipulate those. So if I want to modify the yellow tones or colors, I should say, in this image, I can click on the yellow channel here, and let's say I want to make those darker. I'm just going to pull down, and this is going over the entire image right now. But let's say it's impacting my alligator and I don't want it to do that. What I can do in the newer versions of ON1 Photo RAW, if I press the letter W on my keyboard, I get the AI masking brush. Now, this is by far my favorite tool because I can just click and drag to select the aspect in the frame that I want to apply a mask to. And in this case, I wanted to remove the yellow adjustment that I'm making with this color enhancer from my alligator because there are some yellows in the alligator. So I'm going to erase this from him, and I can select erase up here at the top of the AI masking brush menu, and then just hit the blue check mark, and you'll see that the alligator has now been cut out from the image. So he is no longer receiving this color adjustment. So if I make wild changes, let's just come over here to the red channel and let's just overly saturate, maybe even come into the orange and overly saturate. You can see nothing's happening to the alligator here. Now, I can go ahead and reset this and work independently from the alligator, which is extremely helpful in my opinion. So again, I wanted to darken the yellows, maybe even desaturate them a little bit. and come into the oranges and maybe darken those down as well. And let's just desaturate those. Yeah, I think desaturating them makes the most sense. Okay. And I think that that works out pretty well. There isn't a wide variety of color in this particular image, but the more color you have in your photo, the more you're going to be able to flex on the color space in your image. The next filter is going to be the curves filter. Now, curves filter is like a staple in photo editing. If you know about it, you know about it. And if you don't, I have a video that talks all about the curves. I'll leave that in the description box below if that's something you're interested in learning more about. But essentially here, what I'll do is probably just make a basic S curve. And the way that I'm going to do it is probably a little different than what you're used to seeing. I'm going to use the picker tool here. I'm going to find a point that is really bright. And this is probably the brightest point in the image. It may not be, but I'm going to click there. And it's pretty high up there, right? It's right below the whites on the line here. And then I'm going to grab my eye picker tool again, and I'm going to select something that's a little bit darker. So we'll go with something on the alligator, which is about right here. So we'll click there, and that's pretty low. Okay, so now that I have those points on my curve, I'm just going to go ahead and pull this down in the shadowed areas, and I'm going to push up just a little bit on the brighter area, and that gives me more contrast in the photo. So I can turn this off and turn it back on. Now that's impacting the color. I like what it's doing to this particular image. One of the cool things in ON1 is we can use blend modes with our effects. So if I go ahead and click this 3-line menu and I click on blending, you'll see that blending gets highlighted in my properties pane. You may have a floating properties pane, which is perfectly fine. I have mine nested in the right column just for simplicity's sake on me. But I can now come to this blend mode. And if you're not familiar with blend modes, don't worry. All you have to know is if you want to apply contrast to your image, but not impact the color, come all the way down here to luminosity. So by doing that, what I'm telling ON1 with this curve tool is make the image a little bit more contrasty, but do not change the colors that are in the image when you do it. And that just helps with making this image a little bit more punchy overall. And I like this. Of course, if I wanted to, I could use a mask and apply this only to the alligator, but I have another tool that I'm going to use to make the alligator a little bit more punchy. All right, so we're going to hit add filter one more time, and we're going to come to dynamic contrast. Now, this is one of the staple tools inside of ON1 Photo RAW, and it just applies contrast to the image. You may have seen what it did to the photo already, but let me just go ahead and turn it off and then turn it back on just so you can see how it's like giving the image a little bit more definition. Now, again, I really only want this on our alligator. So what I'm going to do is come down to the mask that we already created, because why do double work? I'm just going to right click and copy the mask, jump over here to dynamic contrast, right click on there on this little mask icon. In the pop-up menu, I'm just going to hit paste mask. And so now I am applying the mask that I had on the color enhancer to the alligator. But I have a problem. It is the opposite of what I want. So what I need to do now is right click on this masking thumbnail and hit invert mask. That's going to give me the actual desired look of what I'm going for, which is it's selecting the alligator. For anyone who may not be familiar with reading the mask overlay here, anything that's in white means that ON1 is applying the effect there, and anything that's in black, there is no effect being applied there. So you can see that because the alligator was all white in that mask, I'm putting the effect on the alligator, which is giving us this contrasted look. Now, if I turn this off and turn it on, you can see the change is really only happening in the alligator. Now, this is way too strong for me, and I do have a video on dynamic contrast and how I like to use it. Personally, I use one of these presets, and then I just use the opacity slider here. That's all that I ever really do with dynamic contrast because I like to keep things simple. So I'll probably pull this around to 40%, give or take. And if I turn this off and turn it back on, it's probably unperceivable on YouTube, but in my view here, I can see exactly what it's doing to the image, and I really do enjoy it. All right. So we're going to go ahead and close out dynamic contrast, and then we're going to hit add filter one last time, because the next thing that I think is extremely helpful for pretty much all photographers when you want to edit your image. Not to say that none of these other tools are not helpful, because they absolutely are. But the last tool that I think is helpful for most photographers is going to be the tone enhancer. All right. Now, I don't necessarily need the tone enhancer on this image, but what the tone enhancer gives us access to is this detail section. And the details, if you want to add just a little bit more grit to your image, you can definitely crank up on the details. You can see what it's doing there. Let me just double click that to reset it. Double click the title here. It'll reset it. And then the clarity does essentially the same thing, just on a little bit of a larger scale. Now, the reason why I bring this tool to your attention, because dynamic contrast could absolutely do the same thing and you have more granularity. This is just a little bit easier to use, and combining dynamic contrast and the tone enhancer is extremely helpful, because what you don't get with the dynamic contrast filter is this ability to spread the compression of whatever you are applying. So let me just add in a little bit of exposure there. As I pull the compression slider to the right, you can see it just kind of fades the image a little bit. You can definitely play around with this. Again, this particular image does not need the tone enhancer. I just wanted to show it, because if you didn't know that it was there, then you wouldn't actually come to use it. But one of the other things that's kind of hidden in the tone enhancer is a curves filter, or curves tool, if you will. So if you really wanted to, you can use just a tone enhancer in the effects module, and you would be able to get the ability to enhance your tones, and as well as adding clarity. Like, this is almost a one-stop shop tool. The only reason why I don't like to use it is I personally like to separate things. Your workflow will be your own workflow. Aside from all of these tools, I do recommend that you explore the other tools that are available inside of ON1, the other filters, if you will, that are available inside of ON1. And if you got questions or you want a specific video, then leave a comment down below. And if I don't already have a video on that, then that may be the next video that I produce here on the channel, because my goal is to help you learn how to use this software as fast and as effectively and efficiently as possible. Now, I know I didn't cover every single thing that you could do as a photographer inside of ON1 here, but if you really want to learn how to use the software, I have a course over on my website. It's the ON1 Basics course. I'll leave a link to it down in the description box below. So if you want to sign up, then that's a method of learning the program in a step-by-step basis. But by signing up for that program, you're also going to receive access to the updated material. So with ON1 Photo RAW 2026 coming out, I'm going to update the course with all of the new stuff that's coming in the 2026 version of ON1 once I get access to that software. And you won't pay anything extra for it. You'll just get access to it. It's a lifetime access, one-time payment to the course, and you get information moving forward. I am using an older version on the course, so I just want to be very clear. However, I am going to update it as soon as the 2026 version is released. So you'll get access to all of that. And then I'll continue to update it as new versions come out. Now, if you want to pick up the 2026 version of ON1 Photo RAW between now and October 31st, you can use coupon code FREEWILL10 and it'll save you some money when you check out. Now, this is an affiliate coupon, and what that means is when you use it, I make a small commission from ON1. It's at no extra charge to you, but it's just a way of me getting compensated for helping you get over to the website. Just think of it that way. And it's a great way of helping this channel. It's a win-win for everyone. If you want to learn ON1 and you need someone to help coach you one-on-one training, I have calls that you can sign up for. A link for that is in the description box below. I'd be happy to help you out. If you got questions, leave it in the comment section. I do get to all the comments, some sooner than others, but I do get to the comments as I clear them out. So until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.